Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mountain Connect and our fabulous session today. Data sold separately, overcoming data shortfalls to develop an evergreen approach to network design. I'm Bob Knight from Harrison Edwards, and the man of the hour is Paul Sulisz. He is the CEO of Biarri Networks, a global end-to-end engineering company that has done some really fabulous stuff and is involved in really exciting projects here in the United States and all around the world, and has also developed, you've probably heard of this really powerful tool called FOND, which enables high-powered network design for people to generate their own auto designs. It's fabulous, and you guys are doing so many great things. Welcome, Paul. Great to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this session.
Yeah, well, at least one person is. That's good. So you're here you're in Denver. Today I'm in Connecticut at Virtual Mountain Connect. This year it's a little bit different. Next year, hopefully we'll all be up in Keystone. But speaking of COVID, there's been a lot of fiber broadband projects that are moving forward like crazy. Everyone has sort of figured out, okay, we've got a big digital divide. We've got a real homework gap. There's a lot of issues that are being caused by internet gaps in our nation and around the world. So let's level set. When you start out planning a broadband network, you need data. So regarding fiber projects, how would you define data? Because data can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. What are all those elements, Paul?
Yeah, sure. So from a strictly outside plant perspective, which is the realm that we try to occupy and do our voodoo with or in, where when we talk about data, we're talking about geospatial data that is going to be used to generate or optimize network designs for the purpose of hopefully one day constructing, running, and operating those networks. So when I think about that, it's and again, because it's geospatial, the easiest way to think about it is in terms of layers. A lot of we can ingest all kinds of different layers, geospatial layers into the process. But generally speaking, when we're meeting with organizations and people, and to your point, more recently it's been virtually, we're talking about parcel or demand data. And demand typically can be a home, a business, or something, or even an LTE point.
All right, so let's take it from, so when we're talking about geospatial data and you bring it down to the parcel, we're looking at various addresses, right, in a community. And then what are the layers on top of that? Is that like rock formations? Is it whether you go aerial or build underground? Tell us about what those various layers are. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important part is understanding whether you're going to go aerial and underground or what mix you're looking for. So in the absence of any existing network, then we would ingest the street data that is typically freely available almost globally. Then from there, we can determine whether we're going to be using a dual-sided path, right? Assuming we go underground. If we have aerial network data available, and that doesn't have to be a telecommunications network layer, it could be a utility, which is commonly what we see, right? We see
a lot,
people, we have poles and strand. So if people want to build a network or design a network rather that is a mix of aerial and underground, they want to minimize the cost. Obviously, you want to try to attach to existing network, particularly aerial network, as much as possible. Then that's the sort of input data we need in order to optimize that solution accordingly.
So there's sort of a lot of pieces of the puzzle when you're starting to plan a network. You obviously need the parcel data. You need to know the topography. You need to know the numbers of homes passed. And you guys are kind of the kings and queens of data. I don't think many other companies have processed as much data as Biarri has, right?
Yeah, we've just seen a lot of it. I don't know how, if we're the kings and queens of it per se, but we have absolutely seen and processed a lot of data globally. And I think touching on what you said as well, some organizations have geo data to the point where you can see what sort of rock you have, anything else that really could assist or prohibit underground construction downstream. but that isn't as common as the other layers, right? So, mind you, we have had instances in the past where we've done a design, we've provided to the customer, and they say this is great, except there's a granite belt going through the city, and we said, well, that's great, except we need to now rerun this because we need to feed that in and identify that when we rerun and adjust the relative costs of the algorithm accordingly. So, so that's not as common. But if there's hardly ever a time where too much data is a bad thing, if that makes sense.
That brings me to the next question, because the granite belt is a really interesting piece. So if a lot of communities or projects, are basing their data off of a Google map, let's say, what do you do if the data is incomplete, if you don't know where that granite belt is, or if some of the new housing developments aren't necessarily put together? What do you recommend?
Yeah, a combination of things. I think first and foremost, we need to be talking to the right people, right? So it's about trying to identify, okay, what is here? What underlying data is available? What do you know that is missing versus everything else, right? So some organizations say, look, we know that we're missing this part of the data, or our data is incomplete, is inaccurate. So then there is a process by which that can be cleaned up and prepared for auto design. Other times, people just don't know what they don't know, which is absolutely fine as well. And in that case, we go hunting for that data, whether we contact local companies, other types of organizations that may have been through there, or and we find that through that investigation side of things and those conversations, we can typically figure out what's the sort of layers that we need. So someone local would typically know, hey, by the way, there's a granite belt. It's very rare that there's someone that hasn't got that sort of information at their fingertips.
So don't be intimidated if there's pieces that are missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically, if we're going all the way down to construction, that data has to be validated anyway, right? So as you go through the end-to-end flow, the data really needs to improve in fidelity. So either you're going to go and validate up front, and typically for the best results, you want to go validate your demand data all the way through to, during the construction write-out, you're validating the path, the route, constructability, and things like that as well, where some of the data is amended or adapted in accordance with what's found in the field.
So I want to come back to data validation in just a moment, but I've read in some of your writings about the importance of why, and starting with the why, and why the why is part of the data. Can you sort of fill us in on that thinking, please?
Absolutely. There's many facets to that. First and foremost, if we understand the broader why of why are we looking at a certain area to either undertake a feasibility level design, or is this an area that is ultimately needs to be connected with fiber or at least broadband? So if the more we understand of what is the vision for the local city or the utility, we can better understand and help guide the conversations through what sort of data is required when. So if someone is purely saying, hey, I'm thinking of maybe in the next 5 years undertaking a project, I don't have a lot of money to spend, but I just want to, is there a ballpark number you can give me? Then because we understand that, we can undertake a very quick rapid fire feasibility level design where we don't have to go out and validate too much of the data, if any, and we can give those sort of bill of materials in accordance with that high feasibility level design. If someone is going down the track a lot faster and saying, no, look, I've got budget, or I'm about to go get funding, or I've applied for funding, can you validate my numbers? Because I want to go build this, then we can say, okay, well, if you're going to build this and you're building it for all these reasons, whether it's to bridge that divide that you spoke of earlier, Bob, or whether it's to sometimes serve priorities within a region, right? So that's the other thing that's interesting, is how a project is phased or sequenced. So if there's a large market or a large city, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of homes, typically in those instances, if we know, hey, we're doing this is the broader why we want to connect our community, but at the same time, it's really important that we serve this area here first, or we want to connect up our hospitals because of this, or we want to connect rather these school districts first. Then we can preface the way the entire project is actually sequenced and how the data should be sequenced and how it should be handled in accordance with that priority list or that sequence of events, if that
So what
makes
you're
sense.
doing is you're prioritizing the community need over the priority of the data efficiency, because you want to make the data work for the community, not the other way around.
Correct. This is ultimately about an outcome, right? So this is a means to an end. So it's important to understand, okay, what's the outcome that you're looking for? Because if there's a mismatch of outcomes, then I would argue that it doesn't matter what we do down here. We could be just playing around for no really good reason. And that's
Yeah.
not what we're here for, right? If we're not
I
making
think,
a meaningful impact,
right.
then, it's, why would we go about that in the first place?
And I think a lot of folks in the fiber broadband industry in general really are sort of singularly focused on the data and on the sequence and on the process, and they don't stop to ask why. What are we really trying to accomplish here? How do we create something that's going to get built, that's going to get passed, that's really going to work?
Yeah. And what we also see a lot, Bob, is that people get sort of analysis paralysis, right? They get
Hmm.
stuck in the minutia of some part of the problem that really, in the grand scheme of things, isn't that big of a deal.
Hmm.
So sometimes we're helping them, pulling them out of that hole, saying that's okay. Actually, let's not die on that hill
Hmm.
because of these other reasons. And it's quite classic in terms of when you talk about take-up rates, because if you're looking at a hybrid network design where it's wireless and fiber to the home in the first phase at least, then the way that we configure the auto design process and the actual engines, uh, we need to be mindful of, okay, what's the sort of take up you want? But as soon as you go wireless, then there's a little bit more flexibility in some of those levers. So we don't have to really hard set them too early in the process. They can remain a little bit flexible. So that's why it's important, again, to understand, okay, what are you trying to do here? And look, if your first phase is wireless and we're just going fiber to the LTE, then these are the reasons why it's okay. And this is how we also ensure that this design is going to serve you well 5 years down the track when you ultimately connect all these people with a fiber feed from that point, say.
Sure. And sometimes, because the community need, maybe wireless is not the right answer. Sometimes
Yeah.
face value might say wireless is the right way to go, and other times might say it might be more efficient, but it's not going to solve the why. So it's
No,
it's a
that's
really
right.
interesting premise.
That's right. And look, I think when we think about all the new technology that's coming out there now, and I remember having a conversation with Jeff Kavlinski a couple of weeks ago around this, was if you're a surgeon and you need to operate on someone remotely, and then this isn't obviously right now, but let's say in the
It's
future
coming.
it's coming, right, where a robot will turn up to your door and it'll be performing something on you, and you need a very good link back to the surgeon who's in another state or another part of the world. You want good internet, and I doubt that's going to be wireless. So we're already seeing some organizations go for the latest and greatest types of PON networks, right? We're already looking at XGS PON networks and beyond, where there's many gigs to the house. So it's fascinating seeing also how bipolar some of the thinking is, where it's like, hey, let's just go out there and get 25 meg out there. And on the other side of the spectrum, it's like, I want, multiple gigs to the house for these reasons. And the areas that we're seeing and that we're trying to, or designing, I wouldn't say that different when you look at them in terms of the demographics, how rural they are. So I find that really intriguing, that in at one side of the spectrum, people are like, hey, I think I got enough data. And by the way, I'm just going 25 bare bones. And over here, it's like, no, can we please future-proof this?
Right.
So those assumptions that we're speaking about in terms of data are quite important to understand. And it comes back to that why. Like, are you just trying to get people on the map, or are
Right.
you trying to make a real impact?
No, I mean that's a really important point. I don't think that it's articulated enough in our industry. So I'm glad that you made it. So we talked about a little bit about verifying data. So if you have an existing data set, let's say you've been working with someone else or you've gathered your own data, is it wise to sort of check your math and get a second opinion and just sort of verify all this stuff, or are you just creating more work at that point?
I think in almost every case, it should be checked. If you're going for funding and if there's a potential that you're not going to get the funding you need, then why not check it to see if you can potentially still connect all your constituents with less money, right? That's not a bad thing, because then you've got options, right? Suddenly you've got this optionality that's crept in that you didn't have before. Instead of saying, hang on, I need to reduce, and now this part of my neighborhood or this part of this neighborhood no longer can be fed for these reasons because I run out of money, I can actually serve more, right? So suddenly you've got all these options. Yeah, sure, you can shrink your boundary of what you're going to serve with this network, but it's more likely that you would say, hang on, if I'm going to get this funding or I've got this funding, I can do this much more. And we've found that on many cases where people have gone in and our customers have gone in to get funding and said, right, I've got this much. And then we check the math, a redesign of sorts is done, and we look at it and say, right, this is what it is. It's X% less, and which means typically that you can serve this much more. So it's been, so that's quite powerful. And I think considering what's happening with federal funding opportunities over the coming years, right, RDOF and others, why not check? Because in particular with the reverse auction, right, you may not get exactly what you need. So why not check it?
2/3 of the RDOF applications were sent back from the FCC. And the RUS Community Connect? I think they're only issuing 20 grants in total. So the chances of receiving grant monies are pretty slim if you think about it. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, to check the math, make sure you know what you have. And so if you can't depend on some federal funds or some grants, maybe there's some other ways.
That's right. And I think when we talk about checking the math, it's about taking on an approach that is deterministic, and it essentially goes bottom up, right? That's one of the key things that we look for is, okay, how did you arrive at these numbers? Well, we use the spreadsheet and law of averages. It's approximately here. That's great as a first cut. However, if we can get data into there that's appropriate, and clean it to the right level, do a bottom up analysis using an algorithmic approach, then you're going to have essentially a shopping list that is pretty good. And the better your shopping list, quite frankly, it's going to be so much easier to depend on that downstream when it comes to going out and getting vendors for construction, minimizing variations out in the field, trying to forecast materials with vendors, right? Because if everyone's building fiber networks, the manufacturers are going to have to keep up with that, and they need the right forecast. They need accurate forecasting, right?
Sounds like validation might take 6-7 figures out of a project cost just by looking at it and just making sure it's more efficient.
Absolutely. And it's
not unheard of, right?
Correct. No, absolutely not.
What's the biggest amount that you've saved a client, would you say? Just broad stroke numbers. Don't give the client.
Probably 30%.
That's huge.
Yeah, and on
a multi-million-dollar
quite a
project,
large area.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's a multi-million-dollar project, right? In large
area, that's right. Look, that's right. And the key, Bob, is to understand and try to make an impact as soon as possible in that stream. And whenever we do that, starting with the data, then you can realize all the benefits of that all the way through. And that's the other thing we're seeing quite a bit. And I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of months with organizations globally, whereby they're trying to take on a digital approach, really get into their data just before construction. That's great. They've got all the right intentions. However, there's a lot of steps that are being missed. So in those cases as well, hey, why don't we just double check, see what this looks like? Because if you got a solid, we hear this all the time, garbage in, garbage out. Right. So if that data used to do a design was not appropriate for that style of design, it's gone out for construction, then there is no doubt going to be infield variations,
Mm.
which cost time and money, right?
So shifting gears, right? Now that you have the data, what comes next?
I think to what you mentioned earlier, it needs to be reviewed. So we need to review and potentially clean it depending on what we're trying to do with the data set. So if you're looking for high level design, there's a certain level of cleaning you can do to that data set, because again, you're looking relatively high level. If you're looking to construct from a design, then you need to go out and you need to validate. So you either validate, there's desktop validation that can be performed, there's auto correction and other things that can be done algorithmically from a desktop. So it's relatively inexpensive compared to sending people out in the field. But as you go downstream and you've got for example, a high level design, you want to go and validate. You need to go out and check certain things, where you're going to attach. Can you construct this way, or do you need to move things around? So it's important you got to do the right things with it, depending on where you are in that process, if that makes sense.
All right. So let's say we have someone who's watching this today in the Mountain Connect virtual audience who is just starting out on their project. They've just been handed this. Maybe they work for local government, and now all of a sudden this project's been thrown in their lap. Or maybe they work for another engineering company or a telco, and they're just trying to figure out where to begin. They've Googled Biarri Networks on their very slow internet currently, and what's the first step that they're going to take with you?
Well, we're going to have a conversation, and we will be asking questions around, okay, let us help us understand the situation. What are we trying to do? What's the why? Where are you at? And how can we help? Is there something on fire, or is there something, it's not quite on fire, but this is where we need to get to. So let us have a look at the data, right? Let's see what you've got, whether it's the data, whether it's a design that is, has come downstream from the data set that was used. We can do some comparisons, compare and contrast, not only the data set, but also designs. It really depends. But it's typically a very quick way just to check that they're on pace, right? And if someone says, hey, this is what I've got, and we look at it and we say, actually, that's looking pretty good, that's pretty consistent, keep going, right? We don't want to inadvertently take anyone off course. So if we're brought in to check and see if everything is relatively where it needs to be within the bounds of their budget and timing, as many Aussies would say, crack on.
Well, isn't this the American story, right? We have an Aussie with a Polish last name, leading a global company out of his looks like his upstairs bedroom in Denver, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's weird, but these are the times, right?
These are the times. So does the process vary drastically based on what the why is and based on what the data sets are? Like, is there, like, you hear a lot of people in our industry who sort of have a formula and they plug things into the formula. Is that valid, or does that do these projects kind of vary pretty drastically based on what the foundation is?
I think there is a high level formula that can be applied. There are some high level or general set of rules, principles that can guide the decision making and guide the outcomes. There is always some level of nuance when it comes to where this network is to be built, right? And I think capturing the nuance in the right way is important. Understanding and acknowledging that there's nuance is important, right? Because a lot of, one of the things we get quite a bit is, hey, I want to use this approach because I just want to cookie cutter this all over the country. Surely it's just rinse, repeat.
Right.
A lot of it is, absolutely. Once you set it up once and we go through the standard things of understanding the types of architectures that you may want to deploy, and obviously the more they can be minimized to a few, the quicker and the more of a rinse repeat model you will have. Understanding the variability of the data sets across the country is important to understand, because then you can apply the right formula, so to speak, to tackle the data as you shift around the country, right? So there are general rules that applied, but then there's always a level of nuance. And if you're looking to build the network and minimize your infield variations, then the nuance is important. And particularly when you're going into metro areas, or you're touching on metro areas that have very strict guidelines or nuanced guidelines of how to construct, how to design, you need to be able to capture those. And you almost always want to try to capture those algorithmically, right? So you're not depending on a human to remember what that guideline is versus what that rule is. And that's the other key. If you want to go fast, you want to really lock in as much as you can and then understand, okay, what are the levers at what point in this to make sure that we are still generating ultimately a homogeneous design, right? Because it's going to be cheaper to operate and maintain. So it's important to understand. And we've seen all kinds of things, particularly with organizations that we have now carried out multiple rollouts, right? We've designed hundreds of thousands of homes passed across different parts of the country. There's always that level of nuance. It's like, how do we agree we're going to capture and use this in the right way?
So I'm speaking with Paul Sulisz. He's CEO of Biarri Networks, end-to-end engineering company, one of the finest in the industry, and also the creators of Fond Auto Design software. I'm Bob Knight from Harris and Edwards. So we've been talking a whole lot about data here at Virtual Mountain Connect. But now, as we sort of get to the last few minutes, as Paul found out just before, it's time for the rapid fire questions. So are you ready, Paul?
Sure.
All right. So you said you're from Denver now, Denver accent. So Paul, first question: Broncos fan?
Sure. But I'm more of a hockey fan, so I'm a massive Avs fan.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. I went to a fight once and a hockey game broke out.
That's exactly right.
Rural or urban, who has worse connectivity in the United States?
I would say rural. There's a lot of areas just have almost nothing. It's fascinating. And I think the projects out there, I don't think the why is not always clear either. And I think that's what's concerning to me, is the mismatch of the why. And sure, there's a lot of government and federal money to chase to try to, provide connectivity. But I would argue, unfortunately, many of those cases, at least that come across my virtual desk, there's a mismatch. And I think we're undertaking it the wrong way. We're trying to solve the wrong problem. And that's something I lose sleep over.
Favorite place to travel in the US?
Oh, I would say Breckenridge, which is up the road. Love skiing. That's one of the reasons we moved here.
Worst connected place in the US you've been to?
I was in a very remote part of West Virginia, which was quite startling.
What do engineers talk about on dates?
Look,
wait. Do engineers go out on dates?
Look, I think engineers attempt to go on dates. I think engineers suffer from analysis paralysis. I'm an engineer at heart, so I don't mind poking fun at engineers. Look, I think they try to analyze stuff and see if the logic makes sense from whoever they're trying to be on a date with.
Is RDOF going to transform America?
Hopefully, partially.
Is it important to have great partners in your work?
Every single time. I think that's a great question. That's something we take very seriously, because I think the problem is so big and there's so many problems to solve within that problem that you can't do it by yourself. Like, it's not, the one-man band thing just won't do it. And I'm of the firm belief, and I've seen a bit of a groundswell from colleagues out there around, not only here in the US, but globally, where people are starting to figure out that it's that big, that we need the right people in the room. And that doesn't mean just us. That means there's a cohort, there's a set of specialists that ultimately and collectively make up something that's unique and special, that's going to solve or can solve that type of problem. So I don't always think that's going to be the same cohort either. But I think if we get the right people in the room, from the various subject matter experts and the best in breed from end to end, that's, I think, how we need to attack the problem. So for me, that's every single time.
Next rapid fire question: is bald beautiful?
Well, I think so. Has been for me for many years. As I said to my kids, I'm ageless now. No one can tell how old I am, and it works well.
All right, final question. What's the one thing you want people to take away from today's discussion, Paul?
Bob, I think that I think it's important that everyone is vulnerable enough to ask to and just get a view from others on, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Does that make sense? Can you help me? So I think people shouldn't be scared to ask for help. And I think, unfortunately, COVID has highlighted that to all of us, right? I think we got to leave, and for us in particular, we got to leave, the masculinity aside and be a little bit vulnerable. And I think that's important. Hey, this is where I'm at. I think I may need some help, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think I'd like everyone to go away thinking, okay, is there something that I should seek some extra advice or a different opinion? Does it hurt to pick up the phone and talk to others out there in the industry, see what they're doing? It doesn't have to be us. It can be other cooperatives, other utilities. Hey, what are you guys doing? And whenever I've seen that happen, there's been positive results. People share their experiences across utilities, across co-ops, across vendors. I think it's that's really powerful. And now more than ever, I think it's important.
I think that's a great place to leave. And I think just in general in the industry, I think people really want to help one another. I mean, people reach out to us all the time about PR marketing. I know they reach out to you guys about engineering. Pick up the phone, look someone up on LinkedIn. You'll be amazed at how generous people are with their time and
I agree with you.
Expertise.
That's been our experience. The amount of conversations we've had with people all over the world on other continents, just looking to see where they're at. Does it make sense? And sometimes we never hear from them again, and that's absolutely fine. That's great that they went on and did what they needed to do. So it's always great to have those conversations. And considering it's so hard to be face to face and in the same room, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a bonus to at least have the ability to have those conversations. And look, we're fortunate enough that we can do this remotely, right? That's right. The other thing that is a challenge. Imagine those that can't even have these sort of conversations. Because there's no
broadband. we get to see each other a few times a week via Zoom, and you know what? We're solving all of the world's problems, right? So
exactly.
I think bigger problems can be solved too.
Absolutely.
Less complicated ones as well. So,
exactly.
Great to see you, Paul Sulisz. He's the CEO of Biarri Networks, an end-to-end engineering company. Does just some of the finest work in the broadband industry, and also the inventors, creators of Fond auto design software, the most powerful auto design tool and efficient tool in the industry. Congrats on all your successes, and thanks for a really interesting conversation today, Paul.
Anytime, Bob. Thank you.